So the school obviously is a big plus.
Yes.
Any other big pluses that you're looking for?
Shoot, just something that I guess when we're looking at how we want to break up our finances, roughly 35% of our household, our net income, we want to spend on a house, because we don't want to be house poor.
Right.
You know, buy a house and think, oh man, you're not going to afford this mortgage.
Right.
We move away, and then BAH fluctuates dramatically. The cost of living here is much higher.
So it's a
We
higher
go somewhere
BAH.
else, they're going to lower the BAH, and
Right.
now you're coming out of pocket $4,000, $4,100, as we talked about with that Melrose.
Right. So where are you hoping to try to keep your payment?
Ideally, we would like to keep it in the 32 to 34 range.
Okay, so 32 to 34 is ideal. Perfect. Okay, and then you got the scenarios that I gave you just in terms of just the quick rough. You saw about 4,100 for that at that higher price, right? At the 660 out there. And I wrote it down.
I grabbed one of these too.
Yeah.
And this has got, if you put 25, 20, 10% down,
right.
and if you roll it in, and it had these same price ranges, because you had the 42, and that's at a 10%, but that's not.
This isn't. Yeah, this isn't VA. It doesn't look like right.
And there's also higher, but it's at 699, so it's not the 660, but it just kind of gives you the ballpark of
if you put 10% down, what you're looking at. Obviously, it drops it significantly. Is that something that you're considering?
If it makes sense, because we don't want to. I mean, I didn't call Brett. I didn't get a hold of him anyway, but just whether or not it's better to keep the place in Texas, sell it, try to take that, put the money in there.
Okay, so that is a possibility still, and if it is, then you could be looking at purchasing at a higher price point, even with the Melrose, and still get it down to ideally where you want to be. And those are the numbers we want to figure out. How much money would you have to put down? Is it closer to the 10? Is it going to be closer to 20 to 25 to get it really in your comfort zone?
When you're talking about putting, $69,000 down, I mean, it eats up a lot of capital quickly.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you, we don't have you're talking about 25%.
Right.
I never swing it. We don't have that.
Right.
Absolutely don't.
Yeah.
So
no, I know. I mean, I know what we had to put in just to get our payment. We wanted to keep ours at under $3,000. So had to put a significant down payment, to make that happen. And luckily was able to buy the place that we did when we did, and then was able to keep it and still rent it out. My brother's in the place, but it's challenging to do. And had a couple good years in real estate, so it was good to be able to be in position. But you're looking almost $120,000 down to make it where you can bring it to under $3,000 a month. But VA, it's so much better without that mortgage insurance. I know.
No, $120,000 down. That's at the price of the home that we own in Texas. Right. And we put in zero on that just because we figured we would rent it out.
Right.
And
yeah, that would pay it off all cash right there, right?
It's so humbling that's 10% is the price of a whole, and
well, that's good. It's good to try to get the numbers in perspective. So that's right. So without just real quick, so without the money down, right? We're just looking at minimal or zero down. Melrose right now at $660, just for comparison, $660 with roughly, it was $25 a month or $35. I mean,
for
the HOA.
Yeah, it was $25.
$25 a month, and then plus Melrose. And he actually did respond to me as well. The listing agent did.
Yeah, he sent that.
And well, that was Jason, the number that I sent you. But he sent me a number, and I could get it more specific. Jason just gave an estimate based on the percentage.
Yeah.
Let me see what I got here from Chris. Chris said, and it was a little bit more than I was expecting, $6,200-ish a year. That's just Melrose. Okay. And they fluctuate. Usually I see between about 4. I don't want to say 7 is the highest, but usually 4 to 6. And then the bigger property, it's got a little bit more on it. So $6,200 a year, that's going to be an additional taxes, right? And normally it's about 1 1/4. Each city is a little bit differently too. Camera actually is a little bit less, is what I heard, than the 1 1/4 estimate for your property taxes. So 1 1/4% is a rough estimate. And so the payment that he showed you, that's everything included, which is called PITI. That's principal, interest, taxes and insurance. Okay. So principal, interest, taxes, insurance. Insurance is going to be your housing insurance. Mm-hmm. So fire insurance and having that all in total. So what he said for that comparison, I actually got 3 scenarios here. So
principal, insurance, tax, and what?
Taxes and insurance. Principal, interest.
Oh,
yeah, the interest on the mortgage interest.
Interest, okay. Yep.
And then taxes. So these are called impounds, having it all included in your payment, so you don't have to make that additional. What do we got here? I just want to try to see. So that was on Chris. Let me pull it from Jason real quick. I know I got the numbers. Actually, I got it written out. So for the River Park, no money down was $4,100 a month. All right. And you still have your closing cost, as we mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. There's closing costs, and in the closing costs, you're going to have escrow, title, and then whoever is doing your loan origination. So there's a cost for the loan. So that ballpark, and I didn't ask him, but I know just from personal experience, sometimes as low as about $8,000, but usually to about $12,000. So 8 to 12, roughly, is going to be about your closing costs. Gotcha. Now, sometimes we can negotiate that based on the opportunity. So say you were interested in this one, 90 days on the market. Mm-hmm. Now, the other one just went in escrow, the first one that you asked about. So it's likely something can happen, but just say we were good at that $660 purchase price, but we wanted them to cover all of our closing costs. We would write that into the contract, seller to pay $10,000 of buyer's recurring and non-recurring closing costs. Right. And what that allows is, so instead of you having to come out of pocket that $10K, it comes in from them. Gotcha. And as I mentioned to you before, what we do for militaries, we're giving 25% of the commission back to our clients as well to help out. So if it helps towards closing costs, if it helps towards repairs, any of those things. Gotcha. And just a ballpark at 6, usually I don't start talking these numbers, but this is just to put it in perspective. So 660, 2.5, so 2% is going to be about 12, about 13, and then another half is 3, so let's say 16. It's about 16, so 25% is 16K. You're looking real quick, 50% is going to be 8, so that's about $4,000 on that purchase. So roughly about 4K you're going to get a credit for that can go towards whatever it is that you want to use it towards, even towards your money down if needed. Okay? So just little things to keep in mind. Then the second example that we had, so now it's single family detached home. So just no HOAs, no Melrose, anything at $630,000, and then that one came out to $3,428 per month, and that's a good rough estimate with everything included. $3,428 per month. Gotcha. At $630, and then to get down to $3,200, just so we know, is roughly $588. So $588,000. Detached property, as in Camarillo, there's only right now 2 of them, right around that price, to get a $3,200 a month, and again, everything included: principal, interest, taxes, insurance.
That's what we figured, that it was $575 to $625 was our range.
Yep. So that puts you right at about $588, and that's for the detached. If we start looking at HOAs, kind of quick rule of thumb, is every $100 a month in HOA is almost $10,000 in purchase price on a detached. So every $100 a month is almost $10,000. That's just quick. That's not an exact, but that would give you. So if we were looking at a $200 a month HOA, we'd be looking at $568. So $568 with a $200 HOA should be an equivalent payment of $3,200. Just like $588. Okay. So you have to look at, okay, what's more important to us? Do we want to have an HOA that's going to maintain, do these things? Sometimes they'll cover the roof. Sometimes they'll do certain things. Other times they don't. And sometimes it's pretty minimal.
Bylaws or whatever.
Yeah. So we get that through it, and then some of it is just based off of our experience and our knowledge of knowing which HOAs cover what. The other thing we can do is we can reach out to the HOA property management company. Sometimes they'll give you the information. Other times they want to wait until the seller pays for what's called the HOA docs, so the CC&Rs, and the transfer. So when we write it into the contract...
HOA docs, DOCS?
DOCS, so it's HOA documents,
okay.
which are the CC&Rs.
12 months?
To get those documents. Yeah. So basically when we open escrow, the seller should find out, the listing agent should find out, okay, what are the seller upfront fees to order these documents? Then it typically takes about a week to 2 weeks for us to get that. So sometimes they go through a third party. Once we receive it on the buying side, you have an additional 5 days, and we're going to go over the timelines here shortly. I just wanted to do the scenarios first, just so as we're trying to get ready, we get a clear idea of what we're looking for. Okay. So in those docs, you're going to get the CC&Rs, which is called the CC&R.
Okay.
That's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So it's basically all your rules. You get a thick thing of all the rules, what color you can paint the house sometimes, how many people can park here, whatever rules and regulations, covenants, conditions, and restrictions.
All right.
So those are all the rules of that particular HOA.
Okay.
And then you'll also get the financial reserves. So that will show how healthy the HOA is.
Oh, gotcha.
Now, if you put in more than 10% down, that's typically not a lender requirement to do the loan, so they don't even have to check those financial reserves. It's called limited review. So 10% or less, then you have to do a full review, which is what we want. Yeah. We want to see the financial documents and see how healthy it is. And if our lender says, hey, guess what? This is a bad HOA. We can't finance in it. We want to know that ahead of time.
Okay.
So that's why the seller's the one who pays for all that. So that's the nice thing. And I'm going to use that to kind of segue into, this isn't the clearest here. Hopefully it comes out okay on the video. At least you'll get the audio. What we're going to get into is we're going to talk about what happens during the transaction, so that you know how you're protected, how the time frames work, because we've already started touching on some of that. So, and then I'd also like to talk about some of the negotiation parts, single offer versus multiple offer, how that works too. Okay, so let's just start with, I mentioned the seller pays for the HOA docs, right? The seller also is going to pay for what's called the NHD, Natural Hazard Disclosure. They're also going to pay for, they have their own title and escrow, and then it'll say to each their own, meaning buyer has their title and escrow fees, seller has theirs. Okay. Now, if we get the seller to agree to cover some of our costs, they're going to be paying a portion of your fees there, right? The other way that a credit comes in, as we talked about before, is when we're negotiating for repairs. If they don't want to do the work, instead they want to give you a credit, then that can go towards your closing costs as well. So it all doesn't have to be done up front. And that's kind of the mistake a lot of buyers will make, is that they walk through the house and they're like, oh, I see termite, I see this, I see that. And so they start trying to discount off of the purchase price based on what they need to do with the house. Right. You start doing that up front, it's going to be tough to get your offer accepted. Because for the seller, they're looking at, okay, every penny for them counts. They're looking at what they net off the entire sale. Gotcha. Once we go through the transaction, now you can start negotiating as we do our request to repair. So let me just show you the timeline, and we'll talk about any of this, and any questions you have, feel free to ask as we're going through it.
What is it, NHD again?
NHD is Natural Hazard Disclosure. It's usually, it ranges from about $80 to $120. Seller pays for it. So I'm going to talk about, let's talk about your out-of-pocket first. Okay. So out-of-pocket that we have to be prepared for is, first is your earnest money deposit, which I'm going to tell you just in terms of how we get that back. But out-of-pocket that we're actually going to be spending on is your home inspection, which roughly ranges between, I'd say, depending on the size of the house,
4 to 6.
Yeah, 4 to 6. We talked about that before too. So home inspection, appraisal, roughly about the same. They got to do a rush. You're going to be closer to the 6. Gotcha. I'd say 450 to 650 is a closer estimate for that. Okay. Now, when we do the home inspection, which is a very general inspection, they could call out some electrical, they could call out plumbing. Then we can bring a specialist in that does that, or a sewer lateral inspection. In Ventura, they require the sewer lateral inspection. All the other cities around here, they typically don't. Okay. So that's up to you if you want to do it. But what I'll do is, the home inspector I've worked with quite a bit for 16 years now, his name's Alex with Best Home Inspection. And he was their top guy back then. He's the owner of the company now. But basically, when he goes through it, just like we checked at the River Park place, I said, should we do a sewer lateral? He's like, no, don't waste your money on a sewer lateral. He's like, all the pipes are, this type of piping, ABS plastic, and all of, he's like, you got no issues with sewer lateral, so don't worry about doing it. So I like having him because I know if he tells me to do something or not, He's in it, and he purchases a bunch of properties, flips a bunch, so he knows like what's got good bones or some serious issues, or it's just a little bit of cosmetic. Gotcha. So, but you have the option in hiring whoever you want to hire. Mm-hmm. You know, home inspector, any of these. But if you ever have any questions, you know, we can help you out with that too. The appraiser, now that's not somebody we get to pick.
Gotcha.
So depending on which loan officer you work with, once you hire them, they'll ask you for your credit card, mm-hmm. and when they order the appraisal, that's assigned to you, that they got all the documents they need up until that point to be able to order that appraisal.
So the appraisal is picked by the loan officer?
They don't pick it, but it has to be a third party because there's not supposed to be any type of relationship. Gotcha. And so they want to make sure there's not too much talking going between the loan officer and that appraiser to keep it unbiased.
Sure, because they could tank it and be like, hey, you got structural damage, this place is going to fall apart, and then knock that price down. Yep.
So the appraiser is going to come in, and this is your biggest protection that you have on the price, because you're going to get somebody who comes in, checks it out. And on a VA appraisal, there are some sellers, there's myths out there that some sellers are concerned with VA or FHA thinking the appraisers are going to be very difficult on the deal. It's not the case anymore. So if I talk to another agent, I share with them and say, look, the only thing for VA that a seller has to pay for is that it's the termite inspection report.
Gotcha.
Which is only $75. They only have to pay for the report. But then Section 1 and Section 2 have to be done. Section 1 is active infestation. Section 2 is anything that could lead to it. So it could be some mildew or some dry rot. Yeah. Sometimes they still have dry rot under Section 1, but Section 1 for most loans is typically required if it's written into the contract. Okay? And then they're going to want that clear. And those are usually your big ticket items. Section 2 could be something like a stain in the ceiling that they can tell there was a leak at some point. So what the termite company is going to want is for you to get a roof guy up there and say, hey, it's not an active leak. We're good here. So they give the heads up to the termite company, and now the termite company is putting their name on it, saying, hey, no leak issue here. But in order to get clearance, we need to take another inspection there. So for VA, Section 1 and 2 have to be completed. Okay, so that's some of the hesitation some people will have with a VA loan, especially if they have an older home and they're worried about these things. And then they say, oh, and you need a roof certification. So now you got to send a roofer out. Roofer checks everything out and says, hey, the only way I'll certify it is if you spend $1,100 here, kind of fix these little spots up, and then we get the clearance. Okay, so that's, try to say it quick. We can talk about that a little bit more in the details. It's normally not a deal killer in any way. We always figure out a way to do it. It's just all negotiable. And many agents think that no seller has to fix these two things. They have to be completed, but it's negotiable between the buyer and the seller. Yeah. Now, if an agent doesn't know that, on the other side, obviously, we're going to push and say, hey, look, sellers got to fix these things, right? Until they start pushing back, then we're going to see where we're at with it. Gotcha. But what I write in my purchase agreement, just so you know, is when we write the offer, I'm going to put seller to pay for termite inspection and Section 1
repairs
and 2 clearance.
Okay.
Not everybody always catches up on what that means, but that means that the repairs and everything's taken care of by the seller. So I'll write that into the contract. If we're in a multiple offer situation, I'm not going to write that because they could throw our offer out.
Gotcha. And
then we can still ask for it during the inspection period. Okay. So that's really it for here. So just, roughly guess about $1,000 for your home inspection and your appraisal. If we find out before the appraisal is ordered, and we always want to do this up front, that home inspection would go through and it's just a disaster, or like, let's get out, we're not going to spend the money on the appraisal.
Sure.
And if we haven't received the report, even if the guys come out and checked it out, we can kill it before he actually puts the whole report together, and then it's like $150. Okay. So you don't have to pay that full thing. So little things like that we want to discover everything as early as we can. Yep. So that's pretty much what you got for out-of-pocket expenses.
Would you have termite, looking at some of these homes in Park Place, there are 17, 18, or 16, 17 builds. Would they have termite damage at that stage in the?
Great question. So River Park, traditionally, I haven't seen any termites over there.
Right.
The one we just did, I sent my guy out there. He didn't see anything again. So it was 0 in terms of termites there. We still do the inspection, especially for, we want to know, and we want something dated and documented saying no termites on this date. That way, if you move in and you find something, we call that termite company up. And for most of them, so say they do a 10. 10 fumigation. Usually on most termite companies, it's 2 to 3 year guaranteed warranty. Gotcha. So anything comes up in those 2 to 3 years, they should come out and zap whatever it is that needs to be done.
Okay.
If they do spot treatment, which when the properties are attached to each other, it's almost the only way they can do it. If you get all 4 connected people to agree to all get out and tent the entire place, then you can do it.
Yeah.
If you don't, then it gets very challenging, you know what I mean, to be able to do it. So spot treatment's your only option, and then that's usually guaranteed for a year after.
Gotcha.
So that's just what's kind of customary there, but you always want to read the report and see what the guarantee is if they do the work.
Okay.
But River Park, you should be good. I wouldn't be overly concerned with this. So we hit these things here. Now let's talk about the offer being accepted. Okay. So now when we send an offer, so let's just use the price at that $660.
Are we still under the buyer out of pocket? Or are we
buyer out of pocket, we're done.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the majority of it. If we were still here,
I mean, it's not terrible unless you keep jumping around from house to house. And
then it can get expensive. Right. Yeah. It can start adding up. Earnest money deposit, I didn't mention so before. So customers 3%. We've done it as low as we've done it lower than that, but typically 5,000 EMD. It's your earnest money deposit. Typically, I can't say it always doesn't get countered. It all depends on the situation. If we're in a multiple and we're looking at the 6, the lowest should probably be about $10,000.
Gotcha.
If we're not in a multiple, it's a single. So say it's the one that's been on for 90 days. We try it at $5K if we can. But what your earnest money deposit is, it's a good faith deposit. It can show your strength as a buyer. I got a video on it too, so I don't mind sending that to you guys because I've done trainings and things on it. So I can send you that just about what the earnest money deposit is. It goes into, so 3 days after our acceptance, that earnest money deposit goes into escrow. Now, escrow has a couple definitions. Escrow number 1 is an actual place, right? So we have All Valley Escrow here on the 3rd floor. So there's escrow officers that work there. They're kind of the intermediary for everything. So you have your buyer's agent. As soon as we get our offer accepted, we have fully executed, I'm going to send it over to the escrow officer. She's going to get a copy of everything. She's going to print out the escrow instructions. Escrow instructions summarizes everything that is in the purchase agreement that's been agreed by both parties.
Okay.
So you're going to see timelines, see when the close of escrow date is supposed to be. As I mentioned before, it's typically 30-day escrow.
All right.
You can try for 45.
Now, why is the 30-day escrow, why is that a sticking point? What is the timeline with the escrow? Is that the 30 days we can get our money back if we don't decide to move forward?
30 is when you'll close and actually get your keys,
okay.
right?
Gotcha.
So escrow, when people say escrow, they can say, how long's the escrow? We'll say it's a 30-day escrow. If we say 30-day escrow, the reason why typically you want to write 30 if you can, if you're in position to do it, is it shows strength in you as a buyer that you got everything ready to go and you're going to close 30 days from when your offer got accepted. 45 is still not out of the question, but if somebody really needs to move to their next property, then it may be an issue, right? So some of the questions I ask when I reach out to the listing agent is, okay, what's your seller's situation? Are they purchasing another house? Have they already found their other house, right? Do they have that home of choice contingency that we talked about where they can get out of our deal? So that's the standard sale versus the home of choice.
That's the home of choice contingency.
Yeah.
That's what contingency means is contingency means home of choice. If they can't buy where they're going, they're going to stay in the house that they're trying to sell right now.
That's one definition of contingency, right? And this is another double meaning one. So one, contingency means good faith excuse out of the contract. So when somebody says they're contingent on finding another property, means they have to sell their house in order to buy their next place. So if you have to sell your place in Texas, you become a contingent buyer. If you have to look at a non-contingent buyer versus a contingent buyer, non-contingent's a safer route because what if this house doesn't sell? What if the buyer backs out of that first transaction? You're a stronger buyer as a non-contingent buyer versus a contingent, especially in a multiple offer situation. Okay.
Gotcha.
Other factors to kind of keep in. The other definition of contingency is...
So just so I can say it the way you're saying it, a non-contingent buyer is a stronger buyer.
Correct.
In a situation like this.
Yep.
Okay.
Especially in a multiple offer situation. In a multiple situation, you typically want to be a non-contingent buyer. And if you can show that you can purchase this place without even selling the other place, then you're even stronger, right? So, so those are always pluses. Doesn't mean you can't get a contingent offer accepted. It's all case by case. But what starts happening, especially when you see 5, 7, 9 offers on one property, as the listing agent, we have to try to figure out, okay, who's the highest risk, who's the least risk, who's the strongest buyer, who's shown the most. And in showing the most, sometimes it's your proof of funds. Sometimes it's your loan officer, right? Who is your loan officer? If I've heard of the loan officer before, great. If I know they have a good reputation. If I haven't heard of the loan officer before, could be a concern. And not always, but at a minimum, I'm going to have a conversation with that loan officer, speak to them, see how well they know your file, right? If they don't know your debt to income, your DTI, your debt to income ratios, they don't know your credit scores. If they don't know what your job history is, they don't know a lot of your details. Yeah. And I can hear that on the phone. I know they don't have their stuff together, and it's going to be challenging in terms of the communication through the process. It can be. If they know all that and they're solid on it and they got a good understanding, then I know that you're further along in the process, and then I feel better about selecting that offer because I can tell it.
Thing also.
Absolutely.
You're confident in making the sell to you.
They have to say, I know I can close this transaction. And almost every will say that. Every loan officer will. I can tell, and I'll ask them, okay, what loan program do you have them on? Which broker are you using? What's your history with them? How timely are they? Are you going to have any issues removing your contingencies? So this is the second definition, okay? So 21 days, you're going to have all your contingencies, good faith excuse out of the contract. So remember we said, and one of the contingencies could be a house. So that's a way out of the contract. I couldn't find the house I was looking for, so I'm backing out of your transaction.
Gotcha.
So that's if we buy a house that has that home of choice contingency, right? So it just becomes that domino thing, right? Because sometimes it'll be 1, 2, 3 buyers all in a row, and if that bottom one falls out, all of them fall out. And they're all connected, and this happens. And the way that it works is all of the agents communicating to each other in a timely process to make sure that we can execute. But I also want to see how strong is this buyer purchasing that property. Right. So I'm going to ask for those details from the listing agent and show me, all right, who are you working with? Have you got a DU approval? That's called a direct underwriting approval. Further along in the process. So it's just different little things that you can get that can give me a tell of how solid they are and how well they vetted the other side. And you'll see some people don't vet at all. They just, oh yeah, looks good. Let's open escrow and roll the dice and see what happens. Right? We try to do as much up front as we can.
Market bubbles.
What's that?
Market bubbles.
Right. So you got, so as we talked about contingencies, the other one is appraisal. That's a way out of the contract. So if the appraisal comes in, so we wrote at 660, appraisal comes in at 640, what happens then? What would you guess happens if the appraisal came in? Buyer and seller agree at 660. Contract, seller is locked in at 660. But the appraisal comes in at 640. What do we do now?
Well, doesn't that give that gives the buyer the option to pull out and then and counter offer at 640?
So a great response. So basically what it does is it gives you another opportunity to renegotiate. What we will say is, okay, well, it appraised at 640. Is your seller willing to drop it down to 640,000? Seller could say, I'm willing to meet you halfway.
Is this at day 21? Or
this is any time in the process, right?
Within that 30
days.
So
within your 21 is all contingencies. That's what we're looking for. All contingencies removed, and now that earnest money deposit, let's just say $10,000, could be at risk if something happens here and we can't close that loan.
So you could potentially lose that $10K?
You could. You could put it at risk. Knock on wood, in 16 years, have never lost any portion of our earnest money deposit. Yeah. But it's because we communicate, we do everything up front. Always know when you have a way out of the contract too. Gotcha. And like I said before, it's not automatic at 21. Yeah. So just because 21 days hits doesn't mean now you're fully committed. It's called an active contract, meaning I have to send them a form that has all the contingencies and us removing all of them before we can put that earnest money at risk. Gotcha. And that's why I want to talk about it with you now, so it's way before we get into this. Yeah. So you're not at day 20 and I'm like, hey, we got to remove all this. Are you sure we're good? Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't heard everything I need to hear from the loan officer yet. They're still waiting on a couple of things. But are you ready to put this at risk, which obviously we don't want to do. So the other thing, and many listing agents are afraid to do this, it's called the only way the seller can get out. I said all the ways that you have to get out. The only way seller can get out on a standard sale, right? They don't have that home of choice. It's just a regular sale and they're gone. They already have their house, whatever their second situation is. Then the only way they can get out is us not doing something we're supposed to do. Meaning, so in 3 days, we don't get the earnest money deposit in.
Okay.
And then they give us a notice of buyer to perform. That's their weapon. It's a document.
Okay.
Notice of buyer to performs, and that still gives you 2 more days after you receive that notice of buyer to perform. 2 days afterwards. If you wait till past 2 days after that, 11:59 p.m., and it goes past that, now the seller can cancel. It doesn't mean that they will. Now they have the right to get out of the contract. If you do everything you're supposed to do through this, they can't get out. Okay. And they'll threaten to cancel. Oh, we're going to cancel if you guys are asking for ridiculous. You're doing too many inspections. And it starts freaking them out. Doing too many inspections. Yeah. What are you going to ask for? You know what? We want to cancel. And I've heard agents been doing this 30 years. And they're like, we're going to cancel. I said, you can't cancel. You don't have the right to cancel, right? We're performing. We're doing everything we're supposed to do. Just because you don't like us now because we're asking for repairs, you're locked in. Okay? So the only way they can get out is notice buyer to perform has to be issued, which a lot of agents are scared to do because they don't want to over pressure the buyer or whatever their case is. And so because they don't want to do it, and I tell them, and the ones that I coach and train, I was like, you have to do that. That's the only way you protect your client. That's the only way you can keep somebody on their ways. Otherwise, they'll never remove all their contingencies. And we've done it. When we've gone to the very end, we've never had to remove all their ways out. Yeah. So that earnest money, we never sweated it to the very end and then closed the transaction.
Gotcha.
So a lot of times when you communicate with the other agent, they can give you a little bit more time. Yeah. Okay, so other important. So 3 days earnest money. Seller has 7 days to get you all the disclosures they know about the property. So they fill out what's called a TDS and an SPQ, transfer disclosure statement. And again, you're going to have it all on video too. The TDS and SPQ are the mandatory. No, I see you right now. I love how you take your notes, man.
I have to. It's in my language too. So.
That's perfect. And people give me a hard time. I mentioned to you, I went to law school. Literally, first REFAP meeting I went to is Real Estate Fraud Advisory Team. Okay. And you're thinking it's supposed to be the top professionals. The guy's busting me because I'm just taking notes the whole time. It's like, but I just came out of law school, bro. You know what I mean? It's like I'm used to typing and trying to read and listen. Sure. And then get called on and look like an idiot in front of everybody. You know what I mean? It's like, you got to be. So the TDS SPQ is Transfer Disclosure Statement, Seller Property Questionnaire. TDS is mandatory. SPQ is highly advised that a seller fills that out.
What's SPQ again?
Seller Property Questionnaire.
SB?
SP.
Oh, SP.
Yeah, Property Questionnaire. And in those documents, the seller has a duty to disclose any material facts that they know about the property. Now, it doesn't happen all the time. California is highly litigious, right? Yeah. So, but that's what they're supposed to do. And the contract is geared to protect you as the buyer because you're taking all the risks. The second that you moved into that house and it records in your name, you're on the hook for the next 30 years, right? And then anything that's wrong with that home, if the seller knew about it and didn't disclose it, you got an issue. Right? Yeah. And I don't like trying to advise on suing anybody or getting into that. Sure. But just know by law, they have a duty to disclose anything they know that if they were buying their own house, they would want to know about it impacting the price. Okay?
Gotcha.
And then we talked about before the only things required, do you remember, for the repairs?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, so 3 things. Water heater strapping.
Oh, that's right. Water heater strapping, the water outlet being plumbed to the outside.
That's code. That's not mandatory.
Oh, that's not mandatory.
Yeah, so it's just a strapping.
Water heater.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the other 2 then.
Smoke detector, carbon monoxide.
Oh, yeah, CO and smoke.
Yeah, and you go towards LA County. If you were to look out there, they got low flush toilets. They want window glazing for the tempered glass. And then a couple other things. But they have a few more in LA. Ventura County, it's just water heater, smoke detector, carbon.
Why is water heater such a big deal? 2 straps on it.
Earthquake.
Oh.
Yeah. Earthquake strapping, man. They want that double strapping. Yep, that's the big thing that they're on. But you'll have some reports that will say, oh, it doesn't have a pan under it, so you got to put a pan on it. Then you'll have some that talk about that pressure relief valve that I showed you, or a flex line that's coming through it, right? So they have all these things. All of that is to keep it up to code. Gotcha. But what has to be done is that strapping, carbon, and smoke. Okay, that's it. Those are the threes. And before they do an appraisal, if we go out there and we see there's no smoke or carbon, which is very common, before the appraiser goes out there, appraiser's going to have to come back. There's usually a $100 extra fee for them to come back out. Yeah. And then it's buyer and seller complaining about who's going to pay that $100 fee, right? Gotcha. And it should be the seller if they didn't do what they were supposed to do before that inspection or the report. Okay, we got a lot of good stuff on here. So escrow, we talked about neutral third party. It's not seller or buyer when that earnest money comes in, right? Yeah. And then ballpark the 10. We talked about how it's protected. So 7 days for seller disclosures.
Yeah, 7 days for seller disclosure.
Yeah. So if they take longer than the 7 days, so say they take till day 20 to get you their final disclosure, or just one disclosure, a new disclosure at day 20, you get an extra 5 days to review. So the rule is any late disclosure, any late report, even though, say we got to 21 and we removed all our ways out of the contract. Yeah. But 5 days before, something crazy happens, a leak or something, and they disclose it to us, we get an additional 5 days after that late disclosure to still get out of the contract and not risk our earnest money deposit.
Gotcha.
So the longer they take, sometimes on disclosures, I won't even call the other side to say, hey, hurry up and send me those, because sometimes I need a little bit extra time around here on the lending side to make sure that we got all our I's dotted, T's crossed, and they tell us, hey, you got full loan approval, your loan docs are coming in. Because once we hear full loan approval, now we know that this deal should close. It's still not 100% guarantee, but you're at like 98, 99% depending on who you're working with there, right?
Gotcha. Okay. So at the 21 day, that's when we should have all of our reasons to back out at least addressed. And what did you call those reasons again?
So the contingencies, all good faith excuses out of the contract. Okay. Then there's also, you have your appraisals, one of them, your inspections, another, the disclosures are another. If you have an HOA, so if we're doing River Park, and just so you know, I'm just thinking about it now because on the selling side, it hurts when you're going to sell the house and it's like, oh, I wish I would have known that. Yeah. A lot of the HOAs there, sometimes they have 3 different ones. This one, I only saw one.
Yeah, the $25.
Right. So hopefully it's only the one that you're paying, but the ones that have 3, they had to pay $400 on each of those to get their docs on all 3. So it's $1,200 just for the seller to pay for the docs to get out of the place, to get that over to the buyer. $1,200. It's crazy, man. But just to be aware of,
keep my California opinions to myself.
No, man. Put them out there, man. You're not offending me, bro.
Money around.
It is crazy. There's money on everything with it. So the good thing on the buying side, seller's the one paying for all this, right? For those things, but you still have your things as you.
Yeah, but on this side of the table, that sounds like, hey, yeah, this is awesome. But then eventually, at some point in the game, you're going to be on the other side of the table going,
yep. Now you're paying it.
Man.
Right. And also, so you know, the listing agent is the one who pays the commissions out. So you talk about, what you're paying on that side, or I'm sorry, not listing agent, the seller. The seller pays the listing agent who's representing them and the buying side. They're paying both sides. Man. So we have the duty to it's called a fiduciary duty to look out for your financial best interest. Yeah. So the very first form, and it's, as I told you, we're not going to do any contracts or anything. If I print any, that's for you just to see what the offer looks like, not for you to say, hey, you're working with me, right? But on there, the first page is called the agency disclosure, and it talks about our fiduciary duty to look out for your financial best interest. So by state law, we're required to do that, because a lot of people think, well, if the seller's paying you, then how are you working for me?
Sure.
So that's the standard by the state, is that I have a fiduciary duty to look out for your best interest, to act fair and honestly with the other side, right, on both sides. And I also have a duty to disclose if I know something about the property, right, that you may not know or that's not visible by the eye. Sure. We do what's called an agent visual inspection, where we just go through. We're not testing. We go through and note anything that we see as we go through. So to keep it simple, seller's duty to disclose, buyer's duty to investigate.
Gotcha.
Okay? And we want to check and ask questions as we're going through it, but there's timing of when we ask. And sometimes buyers right out the gate. It's like, oh, well, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me, and it's too early, and it's setting the wrong stage for that seller where it's like, oh my gosh, what did we get ourselves into?
Now you got a headache as opposed to a potential buyer.
Absolutely. So as we go through, there's specific points where it's like, okay, let's keep our questions kind of together. We're going to keep an eye out. We're going to investigate and do. And then once we get to where we need to be, now we'll start asking questions and sending that. Okay.
Gotcha.
So 3 days, earnest, 7 for the disclosures. 17 is all of your contingencies other than the loan. The loan is 21 days. Okay? So all others are everything else we talked about. The appraisal. It could be you have a house to sell to purchase that property. It could be that one, right? Contingent on purchase. It's called the COP form. So if we're writing a contingent offer, we write our offer, the RPA, Residential Purchase Agreement, with the COP. If we're writing a non-contingent offer, it just means you don't have that house to sell. It's just the RPA is what we're sending over to the other side so they can see whether you have a house to sell or not. Okay. All right. So 17 for all, 21 for the loan. As we said, nothing's automatic, right? We're just going to do that with when needed, really. And typically what will happen is as we do our inspections, so we do our inspections and our appraisal within the first 7 days, ideally.
Okay.
Because then when we have it up front, now we know, okay, we need to further investigate. We wait till the end, which is what people used to advise their clients to do. It's a horrible idea because now you're keeping everybody strung along the whole time. And now if you find anything else out, you don't have the time to do the further investigation. So we want to figure it all out up front, know exactly where we stand in this property, and do that home inspection and then the appraisal at the earliest point that we can.
Sure.
Okay. Then that gives us plenty of time when we're in that driver's seat. Once we get down to 21 days and we hear full loan approval from our loan officer, now we know, okay, we checked all our boxes. I haven't talked about request for repairs, sorry. So request for repairs after we do our inspection, just backtrack just a sec. So after we do it, when we start getting around day 7 to 10, and we know exactly what we're getting and what we're going to ask for, we send them what's called a request for repairs on a form. It's the RR form. They check it out. They can say yes, they can say no, or they can counter it. They can say that they'll do the repairs. They can say that they'll give us a credit. All different ways they can respond to it. They also don't have to respond at all to it.
Really?
It's not mandatory that they respond. And a lot of agents don't know that. They think, hey, well, I'm not removing my contingencies until you respond to that. There's nothing that says they have to respond. And the reason for that is, as I said before, all they have to do by law is water heater, smoke detector, carbon. They don't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
So in the contract, they're already obligated to this. This is all bonus. Anything additional we get is bonus.
Gotcha.
Okay?
So is that the point that if they don't want to request, they don't want to, and you can't sit there and threaten them, but what you can do is
back up.
Yeah.
And that's
but you don't lose your EMD at that point as long as you
you won't lose your EMD.
Gotcha.
Because we're going to do all that up here.
Right. That's
so exactly. So once we hear what the response, or if they give us no response, then we say, hey, look, there's plenty out there. We'll wait for the next one. If you guys aren't willing to help us, we're going to back out of this transaction. Sure. And then they start paying attention and start offering a little bit more. It could go back and forth. So they respond typically on what's called the RRRR, which is, I don't even want to try to do it. Seller response to the request for repairs.
All right. So that's the response.
Yeah, that's their form is the response. So then they have the response on it, and we can accept it or we can counter that. A lot of times when you're getting countering back and forth, it typically doesn't end well on our buyer's side when you're going back and forth. So usually we want to, it's called anchor on negotiating. You want to set the anchor. The anchor is the first part that you're negotiating off of. But if it's too high, and I learned this from my dad teaching many home buyer workshops, always put your seller hat on, right? Yeah. You go to sell your property in Texas, you know what it starts feeling like as you start getting hit, and first you get a certain price and it's not as high as you expected it to be, and you're looking at what you're going to walk away with, and you know you need everything to get into the next. So the more you can put that seller hat on as the buyer, you're going to be able to kind of figure out, okay, this is reasonable or this isn't reasonable, but we're going to try for it, right? And if you can get close to that number, it gets very hard for them to say no because they don't want to lose you.
Sure.
So the better we are at anchoring and finding that right, we negotiate off that point and then try to get you the best terms that we can. And it typically, I mean, got a lot of good success stories that we've helped people out with. So ranges on everything there, though. So that's up front. Does that make sense?
It
Request
does.
repairs?
Yep.
Okay. So now,
back to full loan approval.
Yep. We got full loan approval. We got appraisal, we're good, right? We had no issue, it came in at value and no repairs. On VA and for FHA, they can come in and say, hey, you got peeling paint, or you got some loose wires here in the attic, or you don't have an oven, right? You need to be able to cook moving for VA, and
Sure.
It's actually, depending on the appraiser, he could say built-in microwave is enough to cook a meal in. Versus an oven, right?
Yeah.
Or some will say, no, you have to have an oven,
Yeah.
and all the burners have to be working. If one burner's out, it's got to be fixed.
Sure.
So these are just different things in a VA situation.
Okay.
So basically, we want to hear as is means no repairs, and then also at value. And if it's above, they'll still say at value. Every once in a while, you'll see one go over.
At or at?
At.
At
AT,
value.
at value, and as is. If they say less than that, and just so you know, as a buyer, that's your report, and you don't have to give it to the seller.
Less than is the other one?
Yeah. So it'll as is. Sorry. So as is means no repairs.
Okay.
So they're not asking for any repairs. But that appraiser, if he sees something, if he sees a lot of termite damage,
Yeah.
and they do it, they're going to call and they'll say, no, we need to see termite clearance before we're going to give you the okay on this appraisal.
Gotcha.
Okay. So loan, we're good. Appraisal, we're good.
One more,
Repairs?
the at
Go ahead.
value. If it's at value, what's your response typically?
At value, what do you mean with your response?
So as is, there was no repairs. That's
Right.
And then, but if it's at value,
That means you got the value. So 660 is what we agreed as buyer and seller. You
Right.
got 660
okay.
or higher sometimes. But most lenders aren't going to show the higher. They're just going to
Gotcha.
say at value for the most
Okay.
part. If it's short, and I've seen as little as like $2,000 under the agreed price, it's like, really? You came up with 558 and you couldn't come up with 660, right? I've had that happen, and I learned it's like, okay, when I see these appraisers, I give them their space and let it do it, because I told them, I was like, look, for this buyer, they can't have any type of gap or any difference, right? And I think he was like, hey, because you said that, we're going to put it 2 under, and it's like, really? But then I talked to the lender, and it didn't make a difference. I don't know if there was a credit or something he was able to offer. It didn't change the buyers, but it stressed me. I was like, how are you going to come $2,000 out? You know, so, but you get it's subjective based on the appraiser that you get out there.
Gotcha.
Okay, but a way out of the contract if we can't get them to agree on it. And then I didn't talk about the different options. So what I've seen happen is I've seen them drop it down to 640. I've seen them stay put at 660 and say, hey, you thought it was worth 660, even though the appraisal came at 640. We want you to come in with the difference out of pocket to keep this house. So they do that response. That happens sometimes. So sometimes that's the
So
deal
they want
builder.
the buyer to come out of difference or the seller to come out?
No, the buyer.
The buyer.
They want the buyer to cover that difference, whatever that gap is. If they really want this house and they're in a multiple offer situation.
But then if you get into like your 90 plus days, then that's probably not going to be something that the seller's going to.
Exactly. You're going to have more negotiating power on that 90 plus day property.
Gotcha.
Okay. So what they're going to fear, and so what they could say is, hey, we'll meet you in the middle, 650. You come out an extra 10, we'll drop it 10, we're losing an extra $10,000. That can be an option. Or, you know, you threaten to walk and then they're like, okay, we'll do 640.
Gotcha.
You know, and then sometimes what happens, and it stinks when it happens that way, but it'll be a month or 2 months later, they're sweating it out, and then they call you back and say, hey, we'll do it at 640 now.
Yeah.
You know, but they have to kind of learn the hard way sometimes for it to happen. So those are all the different things that can happen with the appraisal. We got through the request repairs. Now we're, again, full loan contingency. They send us a notice buyer to perform saying, hey, we want you to remove all contingencies. Or what's more common to happen is when they respond to that request for repairs. Okay?
Okay.
So say we end up asking for, let's just say it's minor, not a whole lot in there, but we were able to justify a $2,500 credit.
Okay.
Right? We asked for 25, seller says, yep, we'll give you a 2,500 credit. They're going to check a box that says remove CR1. These are contingency removal. Number 1 is the form.
Okay.
Remove these contingencies, which if they've done everything on their end and we're at our time frame, they're going to ask you to remove all contingencies. Already got the appraisal. Already got the loan. Full approval. Already got everything there. Loan docs are in place.
Gotcha.
Loan docs is that huge stack that you get to go through and sign. Never want to do this again.
God, I love that.
Right? So you got that. And then that's typically going to happen after 21 days, and usually within 7 days of closing for the loan doc signing. Okay. The final thing you have is within 5 days before close, it's called a VP, Verification of Property Condition.
Okay.
That's your final walkthrough.
Your final walkthrough.
So if they said, hey, we're going to fix A, B, C, and D, right? When we do that walkthrough, we want to make sure all those repairs are completed before we allow to fund and close. Okay. That's our last leverage we have after we removed all our ways out of the contract. Last thing, if we need to do it, and you typically never want to, we could delay funding and closing until they fixed what they did, or they have something signed in writing saying it is going to be completed after the fact.
Gotcha.
Right? And now we have at least something in contract saying it's going to be fixed.
Gotcha.
So then it's just funding, which is the day before recording. Typically, sometimes you can do special on the same day, and then recording is confirmation. That's when you get your keys. It's a piece of cake, right?
Super easy.
Yeah, super easy, man. That's just the rough idea in terms of what happens through the process. But once you get up to here, you're pretty much in the home stretch.
Gotcha.
You know, you've done everything. You know exactly where you want to be. You've done all your negotiations. So you're negotiating up front, and then you got more opportunity to negotiate through here. But once you start removing your contingencies, right, then you start removing your ways out.
Gotcha.
Okay? So any questions on this before I talk about multiple versus single counteroffers? Okay. So the multiple versus single is important because it changes the way we can negotiate. It also changes our power, multiple offer, of locking somebody up versus single. Okay, so we'll do the single counteroffer scenario first. Okay, we talked about this a little bit already, right? The single and multiple, do you remember?
We did. We just touched on it, but you parlayed it to what we're going to talk about a little bit
today. Okay, all right. So single counteroffer versus a multiple counter. I'm going to start with single. So single counteroffer, you'll be the buyer, I'll be the seller. Okay. You write me an offer, just throw out a number.
So let's say we got the 660. I write you an offer for 645.
Okay. So you write the offer at 640,000. Okay. 640K is the offer. That's an RPA is referring to the offer. So you're going to see it on that purchase agreement. I get it. I get everything in. I talk to my sellers. My seller, we have no other offers on the table. Been on the market 90 days. Gotcha. I send you a single counter offer. It's called the SCO number 1. The multiple, the multiple is called it's multiple seller, MSCO. If it's not that, it's very close to it, but you can tell the difference between the multiple and the single. On the single counter offer, so it's coming. So this was from the buyer. Now it's coming from the seller. So you wrote that offer, and it went to the seller. The seller has the right to accept it, to reject it, or to counter it. Okay? Rejecting it is done. It's out. If I counter, it's like a rejection in terms of the power. So what that means is if that seller accepts it, he's locked in, and he or she's locked in. And if they get anything else after, they can only take it as a backup offer.
Don't they have 3 days though?
When you wrote the offer, right? They have 3 days to respond to your offer, unless we, if I'm representing you on the buying side, we shorten that expiration down to 1 day. So we can shorten it from 3 down to 1 to put pressure on them that, like, hey, so remember we talked about timing of when the offer comes in?
Yeah.
If I see they got an open house on Sunday and we check it out on Wednesday, I'm going to strongly encourage you, if you're going to write, we write by Thursday. Give them a 24-hour expiration. We want them to make a decision before Friday, before anybody else comes in that weekend.
Gotcha.
So because that's when, especially California, all the activities happening on Saturday, Sunday, Monday usually. Yeah. So if we can lock it up before the weekend, now it's yours, even if anybody shows it afterwards. And most agents are like, let's cancel that open house. For me, I'm going to keep that open house because I'm going to look for that backup offer.
You're going to do multiple buyers.
Exactly. Well, but I don't have to, I can still accept the first offer because I know you're solid.
Sure.
And I know you wrote a great offer and we're good at that amount, right? So if I counter it back, then that's that seller counter offer that goes back to you. So now it's coming from the seller to the buyer back. When it's on the single, on that SCO single, and you see the terms and say they write 650.
Gotcha.
So their counter's at 650. No other terms are countered. Everything else is good. So basically they accepted everything you had in your offer. The only thing they changed was that 650 price. Now you have the power to lock them up. This is something I always clarify with my buyers. It's like, yes, we can counter back, right? Now we're talking for $10,000, roughly $60 in payment. But you have the power to lock this up right now on that single counteroffer. It's your house once we sign it and deliver it to the other side.
Gotcha.
If we sign it and deliver it, it's yours. It's locked in. You have that power in a single. On a multiple, let's just get to it because that's how it's going to change. So let's say same thing. They asked for 660. You wrote 640. The other one wrote 630. The other one wrote 645. Okay. So these are the three offers that came into the seller from three different buyers.
Gotcha.
They send a multiple out to each of them. And they come back. And that multiple on all of them, they could even say highest and best, which I hate it when they do that. Because now you're just left guessing, right? Highest and best offer. Say we come up to 655. They're 645. And they're 655. It's just hypothetical.
So you got two 655s?
We got two 655s, one 645.
Gotcha.
Okay? And everything else looks pretty similar in terms of qualifications, money down, types of loan, all that. It's all pretty apples to apples, not varying much in terms of risk. Now, on that multiple counteroffer, when they sent that out to everybody on that best and highest, I guess an easier way to do it is, let's just say they said 655 and all three of them said yes to 655. Who gets the house?
I guess then you're gonna want to know which one of them has the strongest background. That's when you call the broker agent and then see who knows their numbers on their people.
Yep. How strong are they? Mm-hmm. How well do they communicate? Do they seem like they're on their game? That's exactly right. So when the seller sends that counter, I'll just draw it out just for trying to demonstrate it. That seller signature is here on the multiple counteroffer. Okay. Buyer, if they say yes to it, because they don't want to counter because they know they're competing against other people, they say yes to it, it's still not their house yet.
Gotcha.
Seller gets the final say. They get to pick the one. There's a box at the very end that they pick of the three because they all sent it in. Right. And say this one sent it in second, he was first, he was third, but they all agree to the same terms. Seller gets the final say in terms of who they move forward with.
Gotcha.
Once they give you that second signature and sign off on you, now when you send it back, you're locked in.
Gotcha.
But typically, you're sending this back and just waiting. And usually it's about 3 days because that's their expiration unless they shortened it. But 3 days, and then they're sitting and just waiting to see, and sometimes they're vetting. And we'll put to double app with another loan officer. Mm-hmm. We'll say, send us a DU approval or have a conversation between your loan officer on the buying side and us to see how solid you are. Gotcha. Right? So these all can be terms in that multiple counteroffer for us to be ready. A lot of buyers are like, well, why do I need to do it again? I've already been vetted by this person. They already said yes. Why isn't that enough? Yeah. Once it comes to this, the ball's in that seller's court, right? So if we want to play ball, they're going to see how much we're playing ball, how quick we are to do it, how quick are we to get in there and get the documents and do what we need to do.
Yep. What did you call it earlier? The buyer's response? The buyer participation is like the NBU,
notice buyer to perform.
Notice buyer to perform.
Yeah, notice buyer to perform. That's what the seller can send. They're not going to do any of that ahead of time while we're negotiating on the offer. That's going to come once escrow is open after the offer's already been accepted, but then they can send that notice buyer to perform. Yeah, we're already at 57. I'm going to stop it here.